Welcome to Sleeplis Whispers, where fear meets insomnia. These are true horror stories, told for the sleepless souls who can't close their eyes. Every word you're about to hear, I swear to God, it's true. Tonight's story, the motel that never closed. He didn't believe in places that kept vigil until I worked the night at the Blue Lantern, and it refused to let people leave. My name's Aaron Vega. I was passing through on a run for parts, just a guy with a busted alternator and a schedule that ignored daylight. The Blue Lantern sat off Route 7 like a neon bruise. One crooked sign, a pool of parking, and an office that smelled like old coffee and lotion. Gloria ran the desk with a cigarette behind her lip and the kind of patience people have when they're paid in tips and time. It was the kind of motel you only saw on roads going nowhere fast. Mismatched curtains, a slow ice machine, keys on hooks that clattered when the wind found them. I checked in because my van needed sleep and the rain didn't smell like leaving. Gloria handed me a key and a look. "We don't like long goodbyes," she said. "If you hear something, don't be an idiot." On my second night, the hallway lights hummed. I was halfway to my room when the ceiling speaker clicked and a voice, thin, practiced, like someone reading a list, said, "Aaron Vega." I stopped with my hand on the knob. "Who is that?" I asked. "Room 9, the speaker replied. "Left a jacket." "Remember?" Downstairs, a denim jacket lay folded on the counter with a sticky note. "Aaron, blue denim." I hadn't left it. Gloria shrugged. "Place likes to keep its inventory tidy," she said. "Say a name if you're asked. Give a detail. They like details." The motel practiced names through the ceiling. Rita H. likes jade beads. Boyd, dog, lemon cologne. Each time, an object turned up in a neat way, a bead in a vending slot, a collar on a chair. Gloria called it service. Someone began pinning small slips in the guest book. Name plus detail. People read names into the hush. Rita H. Jade beads, last seen at the truck stop. Volunteers did it as a ritual. It worked sometimes. A man retrieved a pocket watch from under a pillow after his initials were read. A woman found a locket she'd thought lost. Those nights felt like small mercies. Then Kevin didn't come down for breakfast. He worked mornings at the bakery and stopped for free coffee sometimes. His backpack sat under a chair the next morning. His phone was in the office, last text to his sister. "On my way." The sheriff checked cameras. The footage showed him walking across the lot, and then the frames fuzzed. When the image returned, the lot was empty. No car, no footprints. The deputy started showing up earlier. People stopped walking alone after closing. Volunteers who once read names now came in pairs. The ledger filled with careful print. Names in capitals, details exact, times noted. The motel wanted practice, a ritual grammar. You learned its rules. Say the name. Add a small sensory fact, color, song, accent. Never invent. Never use a different name for the same person. A guy once shouted a nickname as a joke and a neon tube popped. He left town upset. The motel corrected sloppiness in small, bureaucratic ways. A car that wouldn't start. A stove that refused to light. A leak that sprang at midnight. Those were punishments that taught precision. People came with photos and faith. A sister from Ohio sat 3 nights reading into a recorder. A van driver's wife drove through the night because a post-it matched a memory. When people left, sometimes the motel returned what it held. The returns were precise: a bead, a pair of keys, a receipt folded into a shirt. The motel was like a ledger that preferred neat entries. The deputy patched cameras, printed protocols, and the motel adapted. It learned to practice names through vents and speaker channels. Read a name back and the lights softened. Speak a detail and a key would rattle in its hook. There were limits. Read a name flippantly and the motel bit back with small misfortunes. Invent names and you'll find your tires slashed or a window cracked. The motel didn't escalate into horror. It corrected like a parish clerk with a grudge. I spent 2 months there doing nights for steady pay and a warm office. Gloria let me listen to the vents. The motel's voice wasn't always a speaker. Sometimes it was the ice machine's clack, the corridor heater's sigh, the pipes tapping in slow Morse. When you listened, the building arranged itself into sentences. It asked for accuracy. Once I read the guest book aloud at Gloria's request. Rita H. Jade beads. Kevin S. and Redcap. Boyd lemon cologne. The lights dimmed, then brightened. At dawn, a trucker banged on the office with a Polaroid. Rita's sister had found a bracelet in a jacket donated 3 towns over. Not every name found closure. Some lingered like marginalia. You'd read them nightly and the motel would keep trying. Some people left town. Others stayed to keep the ritual. The motel didn't force belief. It requested care. One winter, a man burned a page of the ledger under the sodium lamp. The next morning, an office lamp was melted, its plastic folded inward. He left 2 days later. The motel corrected kindly but firmly. It preferred tidy inputs. I didn't plan to stay long. Nights were supposed to be a bridge between errands and the road. But the motel's insistence felt like work that chose me. Gloria let me help in small ways. Run the register, log late calls, answer the old landline. Those chores turned me into a witness. One wet night, a woman burst in, cheeks raw, and dropped a faded photograph on the counter. "Her name's Rita," she said. "We lost her 2 years back." The photo showed Rita at a county fair, smiling with a paper cup. Gloria handed me a cheap microphone and I read the name into a recorder because that was the custom now. "Rita H. Jade Beads," I said. The ice machine clacked as if in agreement. Volunteers came with thermoses and lists. An old teacher read names on a ragged Sunday and cried by the 12th. The care felt civic and private. A skeptical kid from the gas station told me he felt shame when he couldn't recall details. "It's not about ghosts," he said. "It's about attention." The motel's rules were about civic labor, being exact. Kevin's disappearance hardened us. He was the kid from the bakery, the kind of person whose laugh cuts through a room. The sheriff found frames where Kevin's walk dissolved. The stretch of Route 7 kept its secrets. His sister read his name for nights, voice raw. The ledger swelled with Kevin S. Tao. Redcap, 3:17 a.m. People began checking shoulders and car trunks. The motel's ritual became our job. Sometimes the motel returned neat things. A bracelet tucked into a curtain seam, a receipt pressed into a coat. Those returns felt like mercy. Other times it corrected sloppiness. A window split, a lamp melted, a tire gone flat. The motel didn't escalate into horror. It enforced precision. The work changed me. I kept a list in my glove box, names and tiny facts, favorite songs, coat colors, habits. When I drove out to check a stretch of road, I read names aloud first, like a promise. Saying names wasn't enough. Doing something after mattered. When people called, searched, or followed leads, items surfaced. When they didn't, the motel nudged. When I left, I signed the guest book and added, "Likes coffee black." Gloria hooked the key and said, "You took care of the ledger." Sometimes I drive past on other runs. If the neon hums and a vent breathes, I whisper a name the motel once asked me to keep. It's a habit now, a small human thing, the end. Checkout Timey took the night audit job at the Lantern Way because bills don't care about sleep, and the highway was closed for detours. The motel sat like a tired eye off the junction. One cheap neon sign, a leaning awning, and an office that smelled of lemon oil and old receipts. Gloria handed me the key ring with a look that suggested the place had customs and patience. "Listen," she said. "If the speaker says a name, say it back. Add a detail. Be exact." The first week, the building behaved like a place that liked neatness. A scarf on a radiator, a passport tucked into a Bible on the bedside table. The ceiling speaker would click at odd hours and recite a name in a monotone that sounded like a clerk reading a list. When someone read the name back and added something small, favorite song, color of coat, the motel often returned an object, a lost watch, a key, a gum wrapper folded just so. It felt civic, like a town making an inventory of absence. We developed rules. Rate the name. Give a detail, color, scent, a last seen place. Never invent, no jokes. Pair up if you're going to the lot. The motel's replies were not dramatic. They used correction. Miss a detail and your tire wouldn't start or a light would blow. Joke and the vending machine would swallow your change. Those were the ways the building taught precision. People came with desperation that smelled like mothballs and late-night coffee. A woman drove 3 counties to our office with a Polaroid. "He left in a hurry," she said. "His name's Tom." We wrote Tom Harris, blue coat, last seen 3:17 and read it into a cheap recorder as volunteers gathered. The motel consented with small gestures. A bead tucked in a pocket, a shoe by the dumpster. Later, in a donation box at a church, she found his lighter. Those returns felt like tiny miracles delivered with business-like care. Then the night Juniper went missing, the ledger tilted from service to demand. Juniper worked the fish market and treated the cafe as a second home. Her van sat where she'd parked hours before. The key was on the hook and a thermos sat half full. A post-it on the dash read, Juniper, Green Sock, last seen 3:04. The guest book had the same detail penciled the night before. Cameras showed her walking down the road and then a blur, frames that meant nothing. When the footage reappeared, she was gone and her van door sat open to indifferent rain. People stopped treating the motel as quaint then. Volunteers who once read names for amusement came in hushed pairs. The sheriff's office, which had once smiled and called it superstition, began to check camera angles at odd hours. The motel demanded we do more than read names. It wanted follow-through. Say a name and someone must look for it. Say a name and call relatives. The building's assistants required labor. We learned the cost of being careless. A man once came in and shouted a name across the lobby like a party trick. That night his van's battery died and the motel's freezer failed, spoiling a week's worth of concessions. The man left town with his dignity and a tab of losses. A clerk miswrote an initial and the wrong room developed a persistent leak. The motel corrects in petty, practical ways. It isn't scary so much as bureaucratic, an institution enforcing its own rules. To work there properly, you needed small rituals. We taped a rules sheet above the register. Name plus detail plus action. We encouraged families to bring a photograph, a scent, anything precise. The motel seemed to parse those facts like keys. Volunteers would sit in folding chairs and read names into an old cassette, repeating each 3 times. The town picked up the habit. People who once would not drive at night began to take routes they previously avoided. The motel's ritual became civic. There were returns that were quiet and clean. A man reclaimed a watch from under a chair and cried like a man at confession. A teen found a locket in a vending slot that matched a family photo he'd brought. Those hold small power, proof that the work mattered. The motel doesn't conjure answers. It rearranges what people have misplaced so that the missing can be re-encountered. Sometimes the motel's corrections bordered on cruel. A teenager who mocked the ledger left a false name and later woke with a tire slashed and a note under his wiper that read, "Do it, right." Another man tried to invent elaborate names to see what would happen and wound up with every light on his property blowing a filament in the same night. The motel doesn't injure. It interferes mechanically until the town learns accuracy. We tried to keep it practical. The sheriff insisted on logs and video backups. We complied, but the motel remained old rule at heart. It preferred a voice and detail over a citation. The ledger became a public project. The diner across the highway offered a rotating night watch, coffee and gratitude, a place to warm up. The county paper printed a small column about community vigilance and the motel's strange usefulness, which brought more people with photographs and small objects to our door. One winter, after a thaw and a bad stretch of road, a mother came and sat under the fluorescents and read a list she carried in a manila folder. She read her son's name until her voice gave out. The motel's reply was a small green bead she found sewn into the cuff of a donated coat at the church bin. It was not the closure she wanted, but it was a thing to hold, a hinge to a memory. She hugged the bead like a medal. The motel had a way of returning small proofs, the kind of evidence that lets people feel less alone. Not everything stitched up. The motel had patience for some and indifference for others. It sometimes kept trying the same names night after night, until a volunteer gave up and a new pair of hands took over. Its own persistence can be wearying. There were nights I resented it, felt like someone who had inherited a bureaucratic burden from an ancestor who couldn't let things rest. But then someone would walk in with a tiny victory, keys recovered, a photograph returned, and the ledger felt like a public service again. You couldn't game the place. It didn't reward tricks. The correct way to ask the motel to intervene was with humility and precision, a name, a sensory detail, and then action from a human being. When we followed that pattern, things moved. The motel's work is not supernatural so much as social. It organizes attention into small, recoverable acts. I learned to carry a leather-bound notebook after Juniper. It's a practical artifact, names, dates, details. I read them aloud in the cab when I drove routes at night, as if the spoken syllables could do something beyond ink. Once, on a long highway with fog so thick headlights felt like blind fists, I read a name and a detail, and later a trucker called to say he'd seen something folded beside the guardrail, an old scarf with a green thread. The woman who'd been searching came to the office and sat with us in the dawn and cried into her hands. She clasped the scarf like someone who'd been given back a small truth. The change in me wasn't dramatic. I stopped answering the ledger mechanically and started treating it like a small promise. When someone read a name into the office, I didn't just write it down. I called relatives, checked the registry, drove the stretches of road listed. I learned to be patient with the kinds of grief that come measured in missing items and missing hours. There were nights I came home smelling like lemon oil and diesel and felt like I'd done useful, quiet work. Once in late spring, a volunteer showed up with a Polaroid she'd taken of a boy near a bus stop. She wanted us to read his name because she'd dreamed he'd been standing by our lot. We followed the steps, name, detail, action, and within a week the boy's mother called. He'd been found 2 towns over, cold and scared, but alive. The volunteer cried like someone who'd watched a small miracle unfold. And the ledger felt less like burden and more like a civic tool we tended with care. When I left the audit job months later, Gloria pressed the ledger into my hand. "Keep it tidy," she said. "People will read things into it and expect you to do the rest." I keep the book in my glove compartment now. On runs, I add a line when someone asks me to. Name, detail, a promise to check. The motel taught me a strange ethic, that remembering is labor and that small attentions can be rescue. If you ever find a place that asks you to say a name, say it slow, add a detail, and then do the human work after it. Don't treat it like a joke. The motel isn't a monster. It's a clerk with a memory. It will keep repeating the name like a ledger until somebody finishes the sentence. The end. The last vacancy took the night audit for the Willow Crest because the garage owed me a favor, and the highway shut down for snow. The place sat under a pale motel sign, a rectangle of yellow against black, and the office smelled like lemon oil, bleach, and 100 other people's perfumes. Gloria left the key ring with me and said, "Keep the ledger tight. If the speaker names someone, say it back and add a fact. They like facts. My name's Lena Price. I fixed deliveries during the day and drove the night shifts when extra cash made rent less sharp." I thought the motel's odd rule was local color until the speaker called my name the first night, and the building answered in a way that sounded like a habit. "Room 12, the speaker said, soft as paper, left a navy jacket. When I went to room 12, a jacket lay folded on the chair with a sticky note. Lena, Navy. I hadn't left it. Gloria shrugged when I brought it down. "It keeps tidy," she said. "Just do the thing. Name, detail, check." Small things began to appear in tidy places. A necklace under a pillow, a pocket watch on a windowsill, a mitten in the vending machine. Volunteers read names into a cheap recorder around 1 in the morning, repeating each entry 3 times. Name, a sensory detail, last known place. The motel liked that form. It responded, "We learned the rules the hard way." Jokes and invented names didn't help. A kid shouted a nickname and the neon over the sign popped a fuse. Another guy miswrote an initial and woke to the smell of burned toast and dead lights. The motel's corrections were bureaucratic, rather than violent. Punishments that embarrassed you into neatness. Then June disappeared. June worked the cafe on the bypass and liked to kill time at the Willow Crest when her shift ran late. The night she vanished, her van sat in the lot with the hazard blinking. On the dash, a folded slip. June, red gloves, last seen 3:13. The camera showed her walking down the shoulder. The frame fuzzed like a damaged print. When it cleared, the road was empty. After June, the ledger turned solemn. People came with photos and hard faces. The sheriff, who'd counted the place a kitsch, began running angles on the cameras. Volunteers stopped coming for curiosity. They came to work. The motel's voice grew patient and insistent. It wanted names said the right way, small facts offered like keys. Saying a name without action felt wrong. We read names, logged them, then someone had to do the rest. Call family, check a stretch of road, ask a diner across town. The motel returned things more readily when humans followed through. It wasn't magical in a flashy way. It was social. Teach people to pay attention and the town supplies answers. We made a ritual. Each night, volunteers gathered with thermoses and a cassette. We read names. June, red gloves, hums Moon River when nervous. We repeated each 3 times and logged it. Then someone went out. Drive the shoulder, check the shelter, knock on a bar door. Sometimes searches turned up proofs. A button under a guardrail, a lighter on a bench, a scarf on a fence. These were modest bounties, evidence enough to keep looking. The motel enforced precision. A man who tried to game the ledger woke to find his receipts gone. They reappeared shredded in a dumpster. A kid who mocked the practice had lights flicker until he left town. The motel's corrections were never cruel but exact. Once the sheriff came with a thermal camera and a closed mouth. "This is wiring," he said, but he stayed a night. He read names into the recorder, and later his wife found a ring she'd misplaced tucked into a coat at a charity bin. He stopped laughing at the ledger and started bringing a deputy to stand with volunteers. Some returns felt tender. A woman with a faded photograph had it returned inside the spine of a donated Bible. A man retrieved a matchbook from a honeymoon decades gone. Those returns were quiet and precise like receipts. The motel's appetite wasn't endless. If a name was said and no one tried, the motel repeated itself. A post-it on a windshield. A call from the speaker again, more insistent. People kept small routines, read, search, report. The motel's service became a community practice. June's case never closed. A volunteer found a mitten snagged on a reflector matching the note. It was a hinge, not an answer. Families kept the mitten like proof they were still looking. I carried a leather notebook in my van with names and details in a cramped hand. Saying names aloud felt like knitting a rope. Perhaps useful if someone fell. Sometimes the radio crackled in response. Sometimes it did nothing. The motel didn't reward tricks. An exploiter lost his receipts. A teen who mocked rules found his tires slashed. Corrections were practical, annoyances that taught accuracy rather than terror. The town grew steadier. We organized rosters, backed up footage, and verified returns so people couldn't exploit the ledger. The diner handed volunteers coffee and the sheriff checked angles. The ledger became a civic tool. Name, detail, and follow-up. We organized ourselves. A typed sheet went above the register. Name, detail, action. Volunteers signed up on a corkboard rota for the 2 to 4 a.m. slot. Folks who used to joke now brought thermoses and patience. Ruth, a retired librarian with steady hands, taught new volunteers how to read names into the recorder. 3 slow repetitions, 1 sensory fact, last known place. The motel liked that ritual. It listened better to careful voices. One stormed night I rode the shoulder with Ruth and a deputy named Harlan. The wind cut the highway into a white sheet. Ruth read a name. Evelyn Pratt keeps a pencil in her apron. And Harlan swept his light under the guardrail. We found a graphite stub wedged in the rocks. It wasn't a reunion, but it was proof someone had been there. Harlan's knuckles relaxed. He stopped treating the ledger like a joke. The motel's returns remained modest. A button under a bench, a lighter tucked in a jacket, a faded photograph inside a donated book. Families who once stopped searching came back with albums and details, and the act of looking became communal work. The diner put free pie on the table for volunteers every Thursday. The sheriff started sending deputies on rotation. Not every name closes. June's case never had tidy answers, but the mitten we found became a hinge for the family, a sign the search mattered enough to continue. That kind of evidence keeps people going even when the world offers no full explanation. I began keeping my own small line in the ledger. Lena Price, brown thermos, sings off-key, because the practice had changed me. Saying your own name into a public book felt like buying insurance. It was practical and ridiculous at once. When the sheriff finally found a lead in an unrelated case and located a missing man in a neighboring county, the town called the ledger useful but confusing. People stopped treating the motel like a roadside curiosity and started treating it like civic infrastructure. Name, detail, and then actual work. Call, drive. Check before I left the night desk to take a steady route that let me sleep. Gloria handed me the guest book. Keep it tight. Don't let folks make a joke of it, she said. I promised. I kept the book in my glove compartment for months, and I read names into my cab like prayers on long drives. Sometimes an email came from a family saying an item they'd prayed about turned up. Sometimes nothing changed. The ledger taught patience as well as precision. Years later, on a storm-strewn highway, I read out names from the back of that battered book without Gloria or volunteers, just me and a thermos, and a car on the shoulder blinked its hazards in a steady, polite pattern. I pulled up, walked with a flashlight, and found a small tin of buttons snapped into a glove, evidence as fine as a proof. I mailed it to the owner, who wrote a brief thank you. The motel had taught me that remembering requires work you keep doing even when the building is miles behind you. The Willow Crest asks for care, precision, and human follow-through. That asking is not a threat. It's a practice, and practices can save pieces of people if we do them right. When you come across a ledger tucked behind a counter, a place that asks you to read a name, consider it a civic tool. Say the name. Give the detail. Then go do the human thing. The motel will keep repeating the name until someone finishes the sentence, the end. If you're still awake, you've just survived another true horror story from Sleeplis Whispers. Subscribe and stay close, because tomorrow night, I swear to God, it gets worse.